Welcome to On Trauma and Power. I'm your host, Jenn Turner, co-founder and director of the Center for Trauma and Embodiment. I'm so glad you're here with us. Each episode, I sit down with powerful leaders, educators, and survivors from around the world. Join me for these empowering conversations rooted in whole person, embodied experiences where trauma meets power and healing takes shape. Let's dive in. Welcome, Lama Rod.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so glad you're here. Really an honor to connect with you, talk with you, be in community with you. For our guests and for our audience, I would love to just give a little context. You may be familiar with Lama Rod, but in case not, we will link to his work and website, but also I'll share a little now. Lama Rod Owens is a Black Buddhist Southern Queen, an international influencer with a Master of Divinity degree in Buddhist Studies from Harvard Divinity School, with a focus on the intersection of social change, identity, and spiritual practice. Author of The New Saints, From Broken Hearts to Spiritual Warriors, and Love and Rage, The Path of Liberation Through Anger, and co-author of Radical Dharma, Talking Race, Love, and Liberation. His teachings center on freedom, self-expression, and radical self-care. Highly sought after for talks, retreats, and workshops, his mission is showing you how to heal and free yourself. Can't wait to have this conversation, Lama Rod.
Yeah, me too.
So if you're up for it, I'd love for you to sort of guide me and then our listeners through some kind of practice that might be either top of mind today or typical for you, whatever you like.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. I want to offer this practice that I call the Four Naturals, which is a practice that I learned from one of my teachers many years ago. I kind of innovated it, added some other things to it, right? But I teach it as just a basic opening practice for any space, and it's just something that I intuitively do, in my personal practice, like all the time. So let's begin, right? And I always begin practice with just noticing the seat that's rising to hold me. Just noticing and connecting to the weight of my body. Noticing the sensation of my body meeting the seat. And this sensation really becomes my first anchor. So allowing our bodies to be held by the seat, allowing the seat to hold us. And this can become a moment of just resting, letting go of what we're involved in, wrapped up in, and just taking this moment and just allowing the seat to hold us. And moving even further and allowing and rather trusting that the seat can hold us. So I wonder if we can just open up to just a deeper experience of trusting the seat to hold us, which is just another way of the seat caring for us. And when you're ready, I invite you to shift your attention and just begin to notice the earth, the land that is holding you and has held you for a very long time. You can even reflect on the history of the land that you are practicing on or living on right now. We can greet the land and we offer gratitude to the land, to the earth, for holding us, for caring for us all the time. And so when you're ready, I invite you just to shift your attention back to the weight of your body and the seat rising to hold you. And just noticing that we are embodied, that there is a body here. And just letting our bodies be as natural, open, fluid as possible. Which for me just means just letting my body be. Maybe even noticing discomfort as well as comfort. As we allow our bodies to be, this is our natural body. And when you're ready, I invite you to turn just some light attention to the breath, just noticing that you are breathing, that there is an inhale and an exhale, and just letting our breath just be, not changing, not shifting, but just continuing to allow the breath to flow as it does. In this moment, this is our natural breath. And again, when you are ready, I invite you to shift your attention to your mind, and particularly to thoughts, emotions, checking in with how you're feeling, where you're at right now. Maybe taking a moment to just name some of the thoughts or emotions that you're noticing. And just letting our minds just be as it is in this moment, regardless of what is arising. This is our natural mind. So holding space for our natural body, our natural breath, as well as our natural mind, allowing these three expressions of ourselves to simply be, we slowly begin to open to the expression of our natural selves in this moment. Just who we are right now, as we allow ourselves just to simply be, without an agenda, without expectations, just being. And so when you're ready, I invite you to shift your attention back to your seat, to the weight of your body, and allowing just your body, the seat, to come back into focus, back into form. And once you feel as if you've arrived back into a kind of stable form, we slowly begin to reawaken our bodies through just simple, slow movement. Maybe a few simple stretches, readjustment on the seat, maybe adding a few cleansing breaths if you were working with your breath by inhaling deeply into the nose and releasing out of your mouth. And slowly we make our way back into this conversation. And so thank you all for your practice.
Thank you for that beautiful practice. I love your use of invitational language. It's
Yeah.
great. One of the things that I wanted to ask about, which maybe we can
Mm-hmm.
just jump right in, is
Mm-hmm.
around how you bring kind of trauma-informed approaches into your practice and
Yeah.
into your work.
Yeah. Well, I started out as, Buddhist teacher, meditation teacher with the blessing of triggering people in meditation practice early on as a meditation teacher.
Yeah.
And I say it was a blessing because of the kindness of the people that I would kind of activate. you
Mhm.
know,
Right. Right.
in meditation teachings, they would come back and just say, and just give me feedback.
Hmm.
Like this doesn't work, that works. I had situations where people would just, I remember one situation. I was teaching in a group practice and someone got so activated that they felt like they had to disrupt
Yep.
the whole session and give me feedback in the moment. And I think after enough of those happened, I started getting really curious about how to become more trauma informed in my meditation practice, not just for others, right, but also for myself, for my personal practice. And that began the journey that led me through actually meeting you actually for the first time several years ago and working with different trauma practitioners, scholars, researchers. I was really fortunate too at the time. I was living in Boston in Divinity School, and it was really the emergence of like trauma informed contemplative practice,
Hmm.
right? And so there was a lot of organizing, and I was really like quite fortunate to be invited into workshops and meetings and gatherings with these thinkers and researchers, therapists, and so forth. And I just invested from there in, getting training and studying and researching and transforming my practice and my instruction. And it took several years.
Yeah.
Right. And there were certain practices that I just stopped teaching until I could learn how to offer the practices in a way that felt much more accessible.
Oh, that's
Right.
interesting.
hmm
Yeah.
For instance, breath work was
Yeah.
something I stopped teaching for years until I could figure out how to teach it in a way that where people felt invited and felt they had agency and space to be in the practice, right? Instead of just saying, okay, watch your breath, pay attention to your body, all of that, I learned how to soften, right,
Mm-hmm.
those practices and the way that I offer instruction, right? But you have to make mistakes,
Right.
right?
That is true. I really resonate with that. And I appreciate you sharing that too. I think that
hmm
normalizes experiences we all have as we
Yeah.
try to take work into the world and then realize the world isn't responding the way that we thought they were
Yes,
going to.
exactly. Right. And I think as practitioners and teachers, right, we like in our minds, the practices work one way,
Yep.
right? And if I offer instruction in that way, then everyone's going to have the same exact experience. And that's not the case, right?
Right.
So I had to go through that long period of like really understanding, what my role was as
Hmm.
an instructor and practitioner, right? And to trust the space and, well, to trust the transmission of these instructions that people were getting slowly enough instruction to make their own choices and thus to have different experiences, maybe experiences that I wasn't planning or intending, but hopefully experiences that were generative and
Hmm.
healing and
Hmm.
restorative. Right?
I wonder too, I mean, I know that in my process of starting to figure out how to bring trauma informed
Mhm.
principles into a certain practice and even into the therapeutic alliance and the
Yeah,
therapeutic relationship,
yeah,
it sometimes felt like I was breaking a lot of rules that I
yeah,
had learned.
yeah.
And I wonder what that was like for you. I
Mhm.
think there can be a like an irreverence to it, or at least a certain amount
Right.
of, you said curiosity, but
Yeah.
there's a power thing that happens where you want to honor
Mhm.
your teachers or honor the
Yeah,
lineage and be honest about what isn't working.
exactly. And I think that there has to be a kind of courage,
Mm,
right? And for me, what I was doing really wasn't working so well, right? But I was doing exactly as I had been taught, right? But I don't come from a former trauma informed lineage,
mm,
right? I come from a lineage that was like, you just do it, right? And to an extent that works for me, but not
mm,
for the communities that I support.
mm,
Right. And so I had to make a choice. It was like, okay, am I just going to continue just to do the same old thing that was given to me, or am I going to innovate and
mm,
reform this practice so it actually meets people? And as a teacher, practitioner, and so forth, my aspiration, my intention is to get people free from suffering.
mm,
That means that like I have to be willing to change, to adapt, to learn, to train in different modalities, which is what I'm committed to. Right. And it's not dishonoring, the teachings is not dishonoring my lineage, right? It's actually an expression of love
mm,
to make these ancient teachings much more accessible for a contemporary community, right? A contemporary community where they're coming from all kinds of different identity locations and intersectionalities, right? And I don't have to be an expert, right, on all these intersectionalities and identity locations. But what I have to do is train in a way that I can be really open and fluid and adaptable
yes. Yes.
and really open to receiving feedback in the moment and then choosing to change and to adjust.
Mhm. Exactly. I mean, I love what you're saying. And another thing that well, I'm thinking about a lot of different things right
Hmm.
now, but I guess another piece that I'd love to name is that, we see so many people in healing roles in leadership and power figures
Yeah.
that come in with the intention to help
Hmm.
and to heal and actually end up causing a lot of harm
Yes.
or perpetrating abuse
Hmm.
or, all of these things.
Hmm.
And one of the things I think a lot about is how do I not do that?
Yeah.
And what are my practices that hold me accountable as someone out there in the world who is well-meaning and who's
Hmm.
also human and flawed and people will put on a pedestal at times. So
Yes.
I guess I'm always curious to know
Hmm.
what are the internal practices that you might have in
Hmm.
order to, and you said feedback. So for me, I was like, ooh, that's
Yeah.
one of them, the
Hmm.
live time, the humility it
Yeah.
takes. But I'm wondering what else you sort of do to support yourself
Hmm.
in both leading
Hmm.
and being a thought leader and being someone who I think a lot of people really look up to and
Hmm.
learn from,
Hmm.
and also holding that softly.
Yeah. Well, I think of myself first as a student, and then secondly as a teacher,
Mm,
right? But even as I think about myself as a teacher, my expression of teaching is not being an authority
mhm,
or an expert on something, but rather my framework is I am just sharing my practice and what works for me, right? Something I share what I am engaged with, right? All the time, right? And so
mm.
I share it, right? And I often say this, it's that like you just take what you want, take what you need, take what makes sense, but I'm just sharing, right? But this primary identity as a student really like it just keeps me growing and learning. I love learning. right? I love studying. I love just receiving, right, instructions, right? It just feels like a deep, deep kind of holding for me. And once we stop thinking of ourselves as a student, I think we can start getting really trapped, right, in this identity of being a teacher. Because if you're a teacher, then what else do you have to learn, right?
Right. Right.
And those are the big internal things that I go through, right? But being a practitioner also means that like I am still working through the practices and the teachings
Mm,
as well. Like there are still many things that I don't understand, right? That I am learning to move deeper into, right? So that really keeps me busy, right?
yeah.
But externally, right, what has helped me is to first be in relationship with other teachers, right? And so that can form a kind of accountability, right,
Yeah.
structure, but not just other teachers, but mentors and elders as well. When I say being in relationship with other teachers, yeah, I do mean my teachers, right? But I also mean peers and colleagues also, right? And it's just a way to really experience a lot of support,
Mm,
right? And to have people to kind of process with, right? And I see, a lot of teachers who end up creating a lot of harm. I find them to be very isolated,
yeah. That's a
right?
great
And
point.
very
Yep.
pedestaled, right? And so you kind of sit very high above people and you stop taking people seriously and you start getting wrapped up in the power dynamics, which is like status and role play, right? Like, this is who I am, this is who you are. I have something that you need, right? I have this expertise. But I wonder, like, and this is the case in my practice, how do I meet people where they are? Instead of me just like looking down upon people, how do I go and just sit with people and to share these teachings and practices and to learn from one another
Mm,
as well, right? And that's another big piece of this too. It's like I am really interested in learning from the people who study with me, right?
that's great. Yeah. Yeah.
There should always be this exchange, and I think that keeps us in a more, I would say, a balance, more of a balanced relationship, right?
So multidimensional what you talk about
Hmm.
too, right? So we're
Hmm.
talking about, having peers or
Yeah,
even mentors that can say things to
yeah,
us that students can't always, or people that we
exactly.
practice with, right?
Yeah.
Or not in the same way. And I think, that's something I think a lot about and I'm grateful for as well,
Hmm.
just to be transparent about my own practices too, right? It's like it is, but it's also what you say around what is it like to hold a certain amount of knowledge that you can share, but
Hmm.
not be an expert in anyone's experience
Yeah.
or what anyone even needs.
Yep.
I think, I don't know, I talk a lot about this with other therapists that I supervise or mentor and
Hmm.
around like when they're
Hmm.
going through a crisis and thinking about, okay, they might then in those moments say like, well, why am I even a therapist? Like,
Yeah.
I can't even fucking get my life together. It's
Hmm.
like, I get it. And you're not a
Yeah.
therapist because you have your life together.
Yes.
You're a therapist because you can witness, because you
Exactly.
can hold space. And I imagine, particularly in your line of work and practice, that
Hmm.
there's so much of like, you must be like zenned out all the time or whatever people
Hmm.
might think about
Hmm.
you
Hmm.
instead of actually the reality of being a human.
Yes. Right. And I think that is a really interesting place because I think a kind of harm students can perpetrate
Mm,
against the teacher is to bypass their humanity,
mm,
because no one's going to win with that kind of bypassing. Once we start forgetting that, yeah, this teacher, instructor, therapist, whoever may come off as being super wise, super loving, all of that, extraordinary, more than human, right? We start getting wrapped up in a particular kind of power dynamic. Right. And we're all looking to be carried away. I often joke about the old bath soap commercials, Calgon. which is only like relevant for like older millennials and Gen Xers, right? But that
Right there
old
with you.
commercial. Yeah, it's that old commercial Calgon, right? I don't know if they still sell Calgon, but it's just like a soap. It was like a bath soap, and the commercials were always like someone in a tub who's had a long day. They get into the tub, the bath, and the line was Calgon, take me away. you know,
Please rescue me. Yeah.
please rescue me. And that's
Yeah.
the attitude that we bring to teachers, to therapists. Is like, I'm coming to you to take me away from all the suffering. I want to have an experience, especially with spiritual teachers. I want to have a particular experience where you help me to transcend all the stuff that I
Mm,
don't want to deal with. And then we get really attached to that,
hmm.
right? And then you forget, right, that this kind of liberation, particularly spiritual liberation, is actually about being in a relationship
Yeah.
with the discomfort, not bypassing it, right? And then you start projecting on, of course, to the spiritual teacher, right? They're like some mystical, awakened person, right, who can do no harm, and everything that they say and do is enlightened and perfect. And then we lose insight or awareness around the edginess of the humanity itself, the needs,
Mm,
desires, the fears that get actually projected onto students from the teacher,
yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
then teachers start expecting so much from their spiritual communities that they actually lose a sense of who they are outside
Mm,
of the spiritual community, or who they are outside of the title of being a teacher, which is another thing that I take really seriously. I have a life outside of spiritual community, away from like being a teacher, right? I have spaces where I'm just Rod, and people may respect what I do, but they're not here to be a student.
yes.
Right. And that's
Yes.
a different relationship. These are old friends, right? This is my family,
Mhm.
right? You need those relationships, right? To remind you that you're not always the teacher, you're not always in charge, that you are human, and that you are in a relationship with
Yes.
people who see you as many different things, as family members, as lovers, right? As caretakers, and so forth and so on, not their guru,
Mm.
you know?
Isn't that true?
Yeah, and so we can
Isn't
get wrapped up in the power of being a teacher, but like I'm just not interested in that, right? And it's not, I can get into all of this, and I think that I can be read as not it's not an arrogance, but like there's a lot of integrity in what I do,
hmm.
right? And that's why I try to come from, is the integrity, which for me, integrity is this deep awareness of my complexity, my intersectionalities, and to hold all of these locations, these identity locations together,
Mm.
right? And to live in that intersection.
I'm thinking so much about like the parts of self as well, and
Hmm.
how I think whenever we get kind of over identified with one aspect of our identity, we're going to inherently neglect these other parts of
Yep.
ourselves,
Yep.
right?
Hmm.
And when you describe that, like having a life and
Hmm.
having different spaces where people see you differently and
Yeah.
experience and know you differently,
Yeah.
it becomes harder to hide behind or just even,
Yes.
yeah, I get caught up in that. There is something, maybe seductive isn't quite the word, but
Hmm.
like there is something that is
Hmm.
enticing about feeling
Yes.
that admiration. I mean, I feel it
Yeah.
at times after I do a long training at
Yep.
Kripalu or something, and I'm like,
Hmm.
wow,
Yep.
And then it's like I go home to my kids and they're like, will you make me like some mac and cheese? And like, can you please help me like with my homework? And they're frustrated and they're
Hmm.
annoyed. And I'm like, right, yes, I'm
Yep.
also this.
Hmm. Well, as you were sharing, right, it's Jack Cornfield's book. Was it Ecstasy, then the Laundry?
Oh, yes. Yes.
You
What is
know,
that one called? Yes, it's the one about the laundry. Yes, but it's
yeah,
like
yeah. It's like, okay, you're in this moment of ecstasy, and then that fades, and now you have to go and clean your house. You have to go pick up your kids, right? You have to go caretake. And I love that book, and I love that title too, because like that really sums up. It's like, how do we balance moving in and out of these spaces? In one space we can be revered and honored and seen for the depth and the quality of our work, right? And then you leave that space and you're just back out in the world. You're at the grocery store,
yep.
right? You're at home with your kids, like, and they're not there like pedestaling you. Like they're just like, no, I'm hungry. I have needs, right? And how can we engage in this really like what can feel like mundane human things, but also retain like this connection to this other part of our identity,
Hmm. Hmm.
and how can we hold both of these together? And it's a lot of integration
Yeah.
for sure, right?
Yeah.
But for me, I think it's about getting clear about why I do what I do. Like, I don't do what I do to be praised or worshiped or to be seen. I have ways of experiencing that, right? I do what I do because this is the most important thing that I can be doing with my life,
Mm.
is helping people, right? Not getting rich, not getting famous, right? But helping people. And if I receive the support and the care that I need to make the work sustainable, great, right? But I have had to just like teach and be out in the world where like when no one was paying attention, like when no one was showing up,
Hmm.
right? To a
Hmm.
workshop or a retreat or whatever, right? And to continue to push through that. And I remember that. And that's important for me to hold on to. Like there was a time
Yep.
before, people knew who I was,
Yep.
right? And I'm happy about that. You know?
To me, I'm reminded of that at times too when I get to just like start with a new client or
Yeah.
work in a new setting where,
Hmm.
it doesn't, and part of that I think is going to community. It's not like come to me and see me and who I am. It's
Yeah.
like I'm just a person and I have something I could offer you. It may or may not land.
Yeah.
Let's see. And
Absolutely.
like that living into that
Hmm.
practice as you described too of like, doing the work and being with students, it's and accepting their critique and
Hmm.
accepting their input and welcoming that to me is also such a big part of this.
Yep. Yep. And we have to always stay open. In Buddhism, there's this set of teachings called I want to call it the four winds, but it may be called the eight winds. But they're just four sets of kind of like extreme experiences. And one of those sets is, I think, praise and blame.
Mm.
So, how the wind takes us from either extreme back to the other, depending on the moment, depending on the interaction. In one
Mm.
moment, you're praised, and the next moment, you're blamed. And I work with that teaching in a way that, like, I just acknowledge that, like, whatever experience I'm having of praise and exaltation, right, can in this next second be met with blame, right? And I try not to be surprised by that anymore,
Mm.
right?
Like waiting for it or anticipating it coming kind of thing
Well,
or
not anticipating, but holding the space for something different to happen,
mm. Hmm.
right? But knowing something different will happen,
Yeah,
right?
it's like, oh, here it is.
Yeah, and I feel really blessed because no matter how great I think I am in one moment, there's always a little bit of feedback that comes
Mm.
through, and you're like, oh, I guess I'm not as great as I thought I was. But it's okay because this is what being human is,
Hmm.
right? How do we learn if not by making mistakes, right? But even more so, what I had to adopt also is this view that like I am not for everyone,
Yes. Yes.
right? And I think there are teachers and just really public people who are trying to be everything for everyone. And I think that is a loss of integrity.
Yes. So agree. We have this amazing colleague, Tiffany Johnson
Mm-hmm.
James, who's at Georgia Tech, actually in Atlanta,
Okay.
a professor and scholar there, and she sort of helped us early on when we were founding the center in terms of basically saying that like you want to lose people
Yep.
because
Yep.
as you continue to refine what you're doing,
Hmm.
you won't be for everyone,
Exactly.
and losing people or people saying like I don't want to be a part of this anymore
Yep.
is about you refining where you're going and being transparent about that and having integrity.
Yep.
And that was such a powerful moment. And I love hearing you say this again in your way, because
Hmm.
I think there can be certainly for me innately a quality of wanting to please
Hmm.
and wanting to be liked and wanting
Yep.
to do good in the world for as many people as possible.
Exactly.
But that can get all kind of tangled up if you
Yeah.
lose track of that
Yeah.
integrity and your mission,
Yeah.
really.
Yeah. Absolutely. I have changed so much over the years, and I
Mm.
used to go through a lot of grief when people would say, listen, Rod, like I can't, like where you're going, I don't get it, I don't understand, right? I had a student, actually my very first student. We were together for a couple of years, and then they went off and we lost contact. And then a couple of years ago, they came back and wanted to reestablish a relationship. So we met a little bit. And then eventually, they just kind of reached out and said, listen, I'm just like not into what you're doing right now. And, my feelings were kind of hurt with
Of
that.
course.
Like this
Yeah.
person was like one of, my first student, right? And I just kind of sat with that and worked with it. And I was like, yeah,
Mm.
like, of course, like you have different needs now, and I've changed and deepened my practice. And that gave me, kind of the courage to pay more attention to the folks who are like, no, I'm here for what you're doing,
Yeah.
right? I'm here for where you're going to. That's where I want to go to. And I learned how to just invest in the people who are just like, I get it,
Yep.
you
Right.
know? And I tend to, my community tends to be people who are very complex practitioners who are coming from very, all kinds of different places in their practice, but people who are like really interested in evolution and change,
Mm.
right? The times and the transitions of the our collective moment should be changing us.
Yeah.
Like our practice
Yeah.
needs to be evolving to be in conversation with the world right now. And so I'm happy that I learned how to do that,
Mm.
but I can't, as a practitioner, not change. Right. And I get a little cautious, or, with teachers or other kinds of practitioners who haven't changed.
Hmm.
What they said 20 years ago is still what they're saying, right? Or what they're doing. And that maybe works for a particular demographic of people, right? But it doesn't personally work for me, first and foremost. Regardless of students and community, I have a personal commitment to change, to stay in conversation with the changing world,
Mm.
right? To talk about the world in my practice, right? And then secondarily is this is what I offer my community and students.
Mm. Well, it makes so much sense too when you talk about your love of learning and being a
Hmm.
student. It's like when you are learning so much and just as a practice, of course your teaching will also evolve and change
Yeah.
with that. And that's so exciting, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So I've been studying so many things, over the years. And right now, like I am finishing up a couple of years of herbalism studies as well. And I love it, and I incorporate herbalism into what I
Awesome.
do now. Right. And again, that's a change that people are like, yeah, I love it because I'm an herbalist or I'm interested in herbs and how they can support us. Right. But I just do what feels interesting and aligned.
Yes.
the
Love
work.
it.
That's it. I don't think about, oh, does this make sense or who's going to know? I'm like, am I personally called to this? And, and that's how I make choices about my own growing and evolution.
That's great. I wonder if you might even sort of, I don't know, rewind a little bit
Hmm.
and share with us about how you found your way
Hmm.
to Buddhism and to
Hmm.
this practice. I always
Hmm.
think that's can be such a powerful thing to know,
Yeah.
how people find their way. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I grew up here in the South. I'm currently here in Atlanta. And this is, traditionally the ancestral lands of the Creek and Cherokee people. And I grew up northwest of Atlanta, less than an hour and a half in a city called Rome, which was mostly Cherokee territory. And I grew up in church, black church. My mother was a minister. She's retired now. So I grew up going to church, and in my mid-teens, my mother received her own churches to pastor, right? And I loved church. I loved the culture of church, but I wasn't particularly inspired by church. I didn't understand God or Jesus. I had a lot of questions about the world, but I had a lot of like intuitive knowings about the world. Like I believed in the unseen world or the more than human world, right?
Mm,
My whole life, there was no question. Spirits, all kinds of beings. Like that was not part of, that wasn't just imaginary. I just felt like, oh, this is real, but I couldn't quite get the answers that I needed from Christianity, right? And so once I started college, I stopped going to church, right? And my Sunday morning worship became sleeping in and going to brunch, right? Or just recovering from Saturday night. And so that gave me a lot of space to start exploring different parts of my
mm,
identity that I felt was really repressed, right? But I wasn't making a huge rush into any other kind of spiritual practice or religion. I did take a world religions class, right, in college, and the religions that really spoke to me was really actually Islam.
mm,
And of course I've been a lifelong lover of mythologies,
mm,
across different cultures, right? So all of that was really intriguing. But I graduated, I left Georgia, moved to Boston for the first time, and was living at Haley House, which is in the South End, also in Dudley Square as well. And we run, a lot of services for houseless folks, people experiencing houselessness, so job training, food, all kinds of things. Loved it. A lot of the community, it was an interfaith community with a huge Buddhist contingent,
mhm,
right? Which
mhm,
I loved my whole experience at Haley House. Not just because of the Buddhists, but because it was like everyone, like Hindus and Catholics and
mm,
Christian Scientists and all denominations of Christianity. I loved it. But the Buddhists started to influence me, right? And I started getting into meditation, right? Hated it, but I did it, right? And I was really fortunate because, slowly my life just started shutting down, started falling apart. I was going through a kind of like, I call it many things: depression, energetic imbalance, quarter life crisis. Like everything was happening,
mhm,
right? And I was presented with the choice of like really going deeper into this practice, right? And Buddhism was something intellectually that I loved, but was really afraid of the experience, because Buddhism is an experiential tradition. Like you're developing awareness, you're experiencing, you're responding, right? And I had to make a choice to really get into all the material that just felt really tough: the anger, the brokenheartedness, right? The trauma. And once I made that decision, like everything just started opening up, and I realized that I was being called to this path as a teacher, right? And the tradition that was calling me was Tibetan Buddhism. And Tibetan Buddhism just felt really dynamic,
mm,
and it fit into kind of my magical realist view of the world, that the world was really magical, and Tibetan history and culture, like really honored that view,
mm,
right? And so, I met my teachers, I found the monastery, and I eventually moved to the monastery. This is my late 20s. So this was, in terms of a timeline, this was like probably the mid 2000s, 2005, 2006, when I transitioned to the monastery from Boston and went into a 3-year retreat, which is how we train to receive the title of Lama. And
Mm,
Lama just means teacher, right? And I finished my training in 2011 and just started teaching after that. Right?
mm, mm.
Yeah.
What's your perspective on like monastic living? I
Hmm.
think about that in terms of the probably the incredible richness and also the challenges.
Yeah. It's so interesting, right? To talk about this because I don't know if you've noticed. I mean, I'm just noticing this. Apparently, this has been going on for a while, but all of these like monastic orders are like jumping on social media and doing podcasts, and all
Yep.
kinds of like little fun things to kind of get people more involved or more interested in monasticism. So I've been paying attention to a lot of this and really like identifying with a
Mm,
lot of what like these other orders are talking about in terms of their life. But for me, monasticism was incredibly important for me to understand who I was,
mm,
right? And to consciously set boundaries around engaging in certain things that I had traditionally used to distract myself.
yep.
And so we talk about renunciation here, right? And everyone's like, I think sometimes people are like, oh, such a wonderful life. You don't, no, actually, as you are giving up certain activities, certain things, like you're just opening up the space for you to be in a more direct relationship with yourself. And once you get to that point, you're like, I don't know who I am,
Right. That is
right?
terrifying, actually.
It's terrifying, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
there are things about who I am that I have intentionally been trying to get away from. And now there's nothing to run into because I've taken vows against drugs. I've taken vows against sex. I've taken vows against a host of other things, depending on your vows, right? And now it's just me and me, right? And that's where the practice really awakened for me is that like I have to learn to sit with myself and to develop this basic fundamental compassion for
Mm,
myself, to touch into my suffering, to hold that suffering and to allow myself to grieve,
mm,
right? And to let go and to heal, right? And that's one of the most challenging things that we can do in our life is to develop a relationship with ourselves full on without distraction, right? And that really saved my life.
mm,
Like I am able to be in the world now just like loving myself. Like I'm the one that I want to be with, right? I have the tools to process and to move through discomforts, right? And that's what my monastic training and teacher training overall like really gifted me,
wow.
right? And it's so, and monasticism probably isn't something that I will ever return to in this life, right? But it was so important that I did it when I did it,
Hmm.
like at the end of my 20s, right? I
Yeah.
make this choice, and that was the best way to enter into my 30s. And
Mm,
because of those choices, as I'm getting closer to 50, I just feel like I don't know who I would be or how I would be if it wasn't for making that choice in my 20s.
mm,
Right. I have, a lot of friends, my age, who are just like wrestling with things that like isn't even an issue for me anymore because I learned how to practice with it years ago.
yeah.
I think the one issue that I am noticing is that, like, yeah, I spent all these years engaging in spiritual practice and really committing to this path where a lot of my friends were out in careers and like buying houses and starting families. Right. And so a lot of my friends have these teenage kids now,
Mm,
and really established lives. And I feel like I'm just beginning to invest in what it looks like to be in relationship, to have families, to parent, to like buy a house, right? And things like that, right? And but I wouldn't trade any of this for anything. Like I
Mm,
am grateful to have invested those years in my practice. So at this point, I don't have to worry about the spiritual or the emotional work. My work is just like gathering the material resources that I need, which is wonderful, right?
yeah. Yeah, and I think requires a right, like whether it's
Hmm.
courage, irreverence, being willing to kind of go a different path because so many people kind of get on this trajectory. And
Yeah,
of course, as maybe you're sort of alluding to, can also, I mean, certainly arrive to a place of being with teenage kids and having all the things and then
yeah,
wondering like, well, what the hell am I doing kind of
yeah,
moments. But I guess I'm also wondering, in those moments when you decided to go into monastic living
yeah.
and deepen in, was there fear there?
Hmm.
I mean,
Hmm.
was there doubt that you were ready for it or?
Hmm. No, I mean, I when that door opened to monasticism, I was like, that's what I'm doing. It felt so familiar, right? But what was hard was not the monastic vows, but going into a cloistered retreat for over 3 years.
Ah,
That was the struggle, right? It wasn't a struggle until the first night of this cloistering,
mm,
right? When I was like, what did I sign up for? Like, what did I get myself into? Because it all hit me. Like, I am here for years now. I'm not seeing family. I'm not on the phone. I'm not,
mm,
I am practicing solidly for 3 years with a small group of people. And this is it. Like, this is my world, right?
mm,
This retreat home and like the little land around it, right? And so you just move through that, right?
yeah.
And then on the other end of it is just like, oh my God, like I can't believe I got a chance to do that.
Mm,
Right. But when it was over. Right. I was like, okay, great. Like I did that.
yeah.
Now it's time to like be back in the world. Right. Which was
Reintegrate.
my goal.
Mm,
Right. And yeah, I got a little attached to it. But
yeah.
my teacher was like, let it go. Like you've gotten what you needed. Now you need to be in the world. And you have to be with people now as a teacher, not just be secluded and off somewhere. People need to see you. And that's the blessing. I had a particular kind of teacher who really understood what my path was, and he
Hmm.
pushed me on that path even though I didn't understand it.
Mm,
But he was like, you need to be seen, right? And that's what I try to live by. It's just I allow myself to be seen. This is why I'm on social media. This is why I do what I do, right?
mm. There's vulnerability in that too, so much.
Yeah, yeah. And that's what drives the work as well. It's the vulnerability. This is who I am. I'm not trying to hide so much anymore, which is the blessing too, right? That's the huge blessing of so many years of practice is that I can go places and expose things about myself that like isn't the problem anymore.
Mm,
You have only to read any of my books and to see that like
yeah.
TMI is something that feels very foreign to me. Right. And
Oh,
sometimes I'll write something and it'll come out and then I'm like, whoa, I wrote about this, right? I can't believe I put words to this, but I did it because I knew other people needed to read this.
yeah.
Right. And that's the only reason I do it. I don't have to be open and vulnerable about my life, but people need to see me doing it to give them support to practice that same vulnerability and really truth telling for themselves.
Mm.
Right.
Well, we don't see it, so how do we I think
Yeah.
about how do we learn? We learn so much by
Hmm.
modeling, by example,
Yeah.
by seeing how it's done. And I, for one, whenever I watch you speak, even on social media, it's like I feel a little softening toward like, maybe I could do a little meditation. Maybe I
Yeah.
could, I'm such a
Hmm.
body movement person. And
Yes.
I always felt like, I don't know if there's space for me in that world. And I don't know, just how you show up in all of your complexity. It
Hmm.
feels like, actually,
It's
maybe.
possible.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's doable. I mean, it's for me, it's just about being at home. I've
Mm,
learned how to be at home with myself, right?
yeah.
And
Yeah.
yeah, and still lots has been lost. There are a lot of things that I've been disinvited from or not invited to, and resources that certain resources that are hard for me to gather because I privilege the vulnerability and the truth telling, right? Over trying to make people comfortable,
Yes. Yes.
right? And it's, and we all have to come to that kind of understanding and clarity. Like if I'm going to be authentic,
Yep.
right, and truthful, then these are the consequences of that, right? Which I think it's a little bit of a tension. There's tension that arises because some of us want to tell the truth, but we know what that's going to cost us,
Yep. Yep.
right? And I just choose I choose to hold the consequences, right? And I have to trust that telling the truth and being myself is the path. Well, I don't just trust it. I know
Mm,
absolutely that this is
yeah.
the path. Right?
Right.
Though I grieve the loss of resources because of that.
That's real. That
You
is
know,
real.
when people say, "Oh, that's too much," or like, all of that, you hold that disappointment from folks.
It's great. That's really great. I want to honor your time. I
Yeah,
have a bunch more questions for you, but I also want to honor our listeners' time too. So
yeah,
thank you
hmm,
so much
yeah,
for being here for this
absolutely.
conversation. It's incredibly thought provoking and moving. And I, for one, am incredibly grateful that you tell your truth and that
Thank
we get to
you,
hear it and you invite
thank
us
you,
into that.
thank you, and thank you for being one of my teachers as well. As well, like I've learned a lot from you over the years.
It's an
To
honor. That's an
Yeah,
honor.
thank you.
Thank you for joining us for this week's episode of On Trauma and Power. If this conversation resonated with you, or you want to hear more, we'd love for you to subscribe, share, or leave a review. Your support helps these stories reach more people. For more information about today's guest, visit healwithcfte.org/podcast. Follow us on Instagram at On Trauma and Power to stay connected and continue the conversation. To learn more about all that we have to offer here at the Center for Trauma and Embodiment, including training and education for mental health, movement practitioners, and community leaders interested in innovative body-based interventions, head to healwithcfte.org. Thank you for being a part of this exploration with me. Until next time, take care.